Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Chat with Remotely. My name is Elisa Camahort Page. I'm one of the founding advisors of Remotely. And I'm so thrilled today to welcome my friend and colleague, Erica Keswin, best-selling author of two books, Bring Your Human to Work and the upcoming Rituals Roadmap. Erica's work is, to me, seems so prescient and so relevant for these times as we have been thrown in these last, well, approaching 8 months into a completely different way of working for many, many people. So I think it's very, very timely to bring Erica here and have a talk about these issues. And so, Erica, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
You too. So stepping back, I would love to know how your current focus came to be upon empathy and humanity in the workplace. I mean, what was your career previously focused on, and how did you come to see this as a missing component worth your attention, worth your research? Did you have personal experiences that brought this into stark relief? What's the story behind this part of your career?
So I spent about 25 years in the human capital space, which I define as helping companies improve performance through people. So I went to business school and then really focused on the people side of business. And I worked in recruiting and executive coaching and designing performance management programs, all of those different aspects. On the personal side, I would say if you were to speak to people who knew me in nursery school and grammar school and high school and beyond, and you were to say to them, what's one word, if you had to pick just one word to use to describe Erica, what would it be? My guess is they would all say the word connector. So I would say personally and professionally, I've always been focused on relationships and people. But there were two stories, these bookended things that happened to me that really drove me to leave the consulting work I was doing and to begin researching relationships at work. And the stories are, the first one, it sort of dates me, but I'll share it anyway. It takes place in 1998 when I was working in executive recruiting and I got my first device, which was a BlackBerry. So, that does date me, 1998. And I was engaged to my now husband, and he had to go to a conference in Bermuda. And he said, can you come? And I didn't have any vacation days. I was saving them for our wedding and our honeymoon, but I had this device and I was like, maybe I can come. So we went to Bermuda, 4 days. I was on the beach during the day working and seeing him at night. And I remember saying to myself, literally out loud, like, this is the life. This is the best thing. I can't believe I can actually do this. Fast forward 10 years later, we were living in Colorado at the time, a couple of kids later, and a couple of devices later, I found myself walking around my house with a BlackBerry and an iPhone, trying, because I wanted the BlackBerry. For those who are listening who might have had one, it had such a great keyboard, and then the iPhone had the app. So many people back in that day, might have had more than one device. I don't think I was the only crazy one. And I was trying to figure out how to integrate these devices into my life as a person who really is focused and cares so much about relationships and sees the benefit. And so in that time in Colorado, once again, true story, I remember saying to myself out loud, oh my God, I can't believe this is my life, like frustrated with the kids and my two phones. So it really was the juxtaposition of those two experiences,
Hmm.
knowing that someone like me who really does believe in the power and the benefits of strong relationships, seeing how the technology was getting in my way, I thought, my gosh, what about everybody else? And so I began this journey to study the science and the stories of relationships at work.
So interesting. I mean, your first book, Bring Your Human to Work, it seems so prescient now because, of course, here we are on our Zoom, a view into every working from home or you living at work. And, but this is, this, your original work was pre COVID. So, what were some of the insights that went into your first book um, before the pandemic was even part of the picture. I'm sorry, did I hear me?
No, yep, I love the question. So interestingly, a lot of my insights haven't changed, other than the fact that what I was saying before is even that much more important. So in Bring Your Human to Work, I talk about the importance of leaders being real, speaking in a human voice, even being vulnerable to get employees to connect on a deeper level. And I'd say the biggest difference is I had a lot more naysayers back then. So
Mm,
the people that got it. But now, with everybody working from home and trying to communicate over a screen and trying to get people to share with their managers about what's really going on in their lives, not just because it's good for them as people, but we're running businesses. That if I have some major issues and I can't get my work done, you want to have a culture where people feel safe sharing what's going on so somebody else can come in and support them and help them. And so what I'm finding is that the many of the themes, and there's a whole chapter in Bring Your Human to Work on wellness and mental health,
mm.
and giving back, which is what a lot of people are focused on. So it's been really interesting to see that people that might have said to me, well, maybe not to me because they would feel badly, but maybe thought in their head, this is so touchy feely, and how is this connected to my business? They finally are starting to get it.
So your first book was just a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah,
And
it was,
you've gone very back to back.
yeah,
Uh,
September 2018.
oh, same exact month as mine. That's right.
I remember.
Um, so already in September 18th, I'm wondering if I spend a lot of time talking to people in companies about how to manage not just the touchy feely stuff, but the contentious stuff because of our political environment, and how to people say bring your whole self to work and want to know about what you're activating about, but I talk to a lot of people about how so many of their employees are activating politically more than they ever did before. Is this something that you were already looking into a couple of years ago about how to sort of manage a workforce that may have very divergent views?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think right now we're at a time that we haven't seen before in terms of what's going on with racial unrest and diametrically opposed political views. But even in 2018, we were talking about a couple of things. One, before I get into some of the political stuff, to me, bringing your human to work it's bringing your best self to work.
Mm.
Your most appropriate self to work. So there is this, you don't, it is a workplace. Let me just, good that with that kind of a caveat. On the political beliefs, again, even in 2018, I went to a conference that summer in 2018 with a number of CEOs, from General Mills and Walmart, PayPal. The CEO of PayPal was there. And the whole theme was about speaking out on issues and values. And what they talked about, and I believe this, is that as a leader, you can't vocally, publicly, and some people disagree with me on this, I'll say, speak out on every issue. I think that can get very tricky, and it's a one part, of what, you're running a business. So many of those CEOs were saying, we're going to pick issues that we feel comfortable speaking out on in a public forum. And when they were making the decision of, what to speak out on, do I speak out on what's going on in Charlottesville versus something around LGBT, all different things, they were focused on issues that were related to their mission and values. And so the CEO of General Mills shared a story where, they've been around for a couple hundred years, and there was a bill passed in Minnesota where they're based about, banning same-sex marriage, and equality has always been one of their values. They felt very strongly speaking out on that. It was part of the soul and the essence of that brand. And other people were saying, again, this is a couple of years ago, talking about Charlottesville. And while the CEO had opinions on it, did not make that part of his public
Mm.
pulpit, made that decision. So I thought that was an interesting way to look at it.
That is really interesting. I mean, you could say all of those issues are about equality. I always talk to people about you have to triage your issues. You can't be a leader because you can't be well informed enough. I can be upset about 25 different issues, but how can I be a leader on 25 different things?
Exactly.
I can't possibly do all the research and have all the information to be worth someone looking to me. Can support other people who are leaders on those issues. I always think back very early in my tech career. I was tasked with trying to bring along this young woman who had joined and was assisting. I think she was assisting the VP of sales, and she was being really off-putting to a lot of other, well, the people she needed to work with, all the other assistants. Like there was, anyway, so I was somehow given this task of trying to coach her, although I was not in HR and should not have been given that task. But I think, and she said something very, very relevant to what you were just saying about bringing your best self. And she said, well, this is me. This is who I am. And I said, well, they don't really pay us to come here and be just who we are. They pay us to come here and do a job. So you have to figure out a way to make those two things work together, who you are and what your job is. Or it's going to be a short, oh, sorry. I'm in an unusual place for me. And so I don't know if I can make that stop. Anyway, but it's interesting because I might have a different perspective about it today because I'm very, the last 20 years, I have one persona. You can look online and find all my beliefs and all my business, everything I do professionally. But I realize that's not for everybody. And it all has to be depending on the person. Oh, now we're going to hear the voicemail. Oh my God. Okay. It's like, I don't know how to, volume. Okay. All right. So that's,
this is life. COVID.
Yeah, I'm sort of in a different place than I am usually because I had to come help my parents with something, and so there you go. Your new book, Rituals Roadmap, it to me also seems prescient because I got the book deal on, and you wrote the book, because you wrote the book pre-COVID. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, but you were recommending rituals even for teams that were co-located. So just tell us first about the book as a whole, but also how it's just more relevant than ever in these times and more important.
Yes. So one of the aha moments that I had after bringing your, Human to Work came out was that, and I was looking at all the examples and all the leaders that I had spoken with, is that rituals are a tool of the human workplace. So when I looked at all the companies that were doing the best job of helping employees bring their human to work and creating a more human workplace, many of them were doing that through rituals. But I didn't really see that theme, or I wasn't able to connect those dots until after the book was written. So I started working on the book, and to your question, yes, I handed in the manuscript on March 30th. 17 days after my family and I were quarantining here in Connecticut, where we are right now. So I handed it in and thought, oh my gosh, like, what is going to happen here? Am I going to have to rewrite this book? Is it after years, as you know, it takes years to write a book? What is going to happen? So what I found was that while some of the numbers in the book may have changed, the unemployment rate, sadly, one or two of the companies, some of the smaller companies, I don't know if they'll be able to come back. I hope they will. The themes not only were the same, but they were that much more relevant, that people were leaning on their rituals personally, with their family, with their colleagues, with their clients more than ever before. And what I did do, though, was I wrote during April and May, when I was doing edits and all the back and forth that you have when you're writing a book, I wrote an addendum, a PS, a postscript chapter that is titled Rituals During Turbulent Times. And just how important rituals can be in times like this to keep us grounded. Because from a science perspective, rituals give us a sense of psychological safety and belonging and an opportunity to connect employees back to purpose. And that is good for people, but
So,
it's also good for business.
so let's take a step back. How do you define, what is your definition of a ritual?
So a ritual is something that it might be, it could be anything, something that you do every day. There is often repetition when you think about ritual, but you're giving that thing that you're doing, going for a walk, taking a deep breath, doing some meditation, sitting in a meeting and saying something, you're giving it a certain level of intention and attention. Because if you just get up in the morning and, let's say, brush your teeth, and that's a routine, but it's not a ritual. But while you're brushing your teeth, if you do something where you're thinking about what you're grateful for, and have certain things that you do while you're brushing your teeth, you give it a sense of intention, and it's something that you do on a regular basis. And one of the questions that I ask people, or when I'm asking them about their rituals, is people aren't really sure if it's a ritual or not. I'll say, well, how would it make you feel if it went away? And so if you're someone who does something every morning or every evening and then you stop doing it, it would feel weird in your body, that like something was missing.
So can there be, so thank you, because I think it's really helpful to distinguish rituals from habits
Yep.
or routines, which you said routines. But can we have rituals that we've created without realizing it?
100%. Many of the, like in the book, some of the coolest rituals, they're just all of a sudden one day people are realizing, wow, we do this every day. And so it's not going to be a ritual until you realize it, because you need to bring that intention, or you're not conscious of what you're doing or why you're even doing it, for example. So let me give you a personal example. So I would, I drink my coffee in the morning is my ritual. And I go to Starbucks whenever I can. It's sort of my place. My Starbucks barista is the person that inspired my book, Bring Your Human to Work. It's a whole other story. But I would go and I would get my coffee and I would sit at Starbucks or bring it home and do my to-do list and feel really productive. And then one day, and I love coffee in the morning, and I think about it at night before I go to bed. Like, I get very excited for my morning coffee. I will admit that. And one day I realized that I didn't even taste it. I was like, here I was doing something every day, and I didn't even taste it. It was just gone before it started. And so what I consciously decided to do was not do my to-do list, get my coffee, take a couple deep breaths, feel the heat on my hands, and just use it to settle myself. Not, it doesn't have to be 20 minutes, it could be 5 minutes, but it's bringing that level of intention and attention to it that for me made it become a ritual. I was still doing it every day before, but it's this elevation in what it does for you and what it means for you. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I'm not gonna, like, my ritual with my Starbucks has gotten completely screwed up by this pandemic, because I used to do my morning walk, and then my incentive was at the end, I would stop at Starbucks and pick up a coffee. And no, Starbucks did not sponsor this webinar, but but now with COVID, I have been, and then I might not sit and drink with it. I might still walk home drinking it, but now with COVID, I like pick it up, and I live just a few blocks from the Starbucks, so I walk home, and I like put my straw in and wipe. I'm still one of those people's wiping down things that I get from the outside world. Um, and so I feel like it is sort of like ritual interruptus, because now there's this layer of attached to it. Um, but I find it really poignant, the idea, and I confess, I'm like, I was trying while you were talking and while I've been thinking about this interview, I've been trying to think about work rituals I might have done, and I was feeling like there weren't things that we did every day. There were little team inside jokes that we used, team little things that we did. um so can a ritual be something that every time a certain kind of thing happens, that this response and team communication around it will happen, or certain catchphrases or certain inside jokes? Do those count as rituals?
I mean, they can. I mean, the book, the way that I structured the book was that I looked at rituals from the perspective of the employee life cycle. So if someone listening is a manager or has a business, really, or employee at any level, you can think about rituals, in the beginning. How do you onboard new employees? Do you have rituals in meetings? Do you have rituals when you're eating together? When back in the day when people smoked, the smoking break was a huge ritual, other than the fact that people were addicted to the
Yes.
nicotine. So there's a whole chapter in the book called the no smoke break, where I talk about companies that have rituals around when they're taking breaks. How do you celebrate milestones? And I think you'll like this, and you can think about it and tell me if it brings up any ideas about any rituals that you guys had, or companies that you've worked for. But sometimes I would ask people about their rituals, and they didn't know. I can't think of any. Maybe we didn't have any rituals. And the question that I figured out that would get me to an answer was, and I'll pick a different company than Starbucks, but let's say Chipotle is also in the book. And so I said to Marisa, who's the head of HR for Chipotle, okay, Marisa, when do employees at Chipotle feel most Chipotle-ish, or most like a Chipotle employee? So when is that? And she was immediately able to say, we have a big ritual around eating together. And
Mm.
they, Chipotle, not that I've ever gone there at 10:30 in the morning for a burrito, but I guess they open at 10:30. And from 10 to 10:15, wherever your Chipotle is, they stop, everybody gets their lunch, and they all eat together. And that's when they feel. So that's how I started to get at these different company rituals.
Interesting. I think a lot of restaurants are, they are very family. The staff feels like family, and a lot of restaurants do family
Yeah.
lunch or family dinner or family, like they eat together either before or after a shift. I think that's pretty common, and what I am finding, we're into our 8th month, I guess, approaching into being into our 8th month. And I think companies feel like logistically they've settled, like, okay, here's how we're handling this logistically. And I see some rumbling out there, from CEO land and Twitter land, that, okay, well, so we figured out this remote work thing and it's just not good enough. There was an article recently which quoted all these CEOs, most of whom were bringing up cultural things, like it's just not as good for innovation, it's just not as good for conversation, it's just not as good for relationship building, it's just not. And yet, for a lot of those companies, they are still going to be locked down for a while. And what I said the other day that I think you saw was that we may be logistically settled on how we're doing things, but I don't think we're culturally settled on how we're doing things. And all creativity, innovation, relationships are all about culture, not logistics. So, as companies move beyond this initial logistical, can we even do this? And they're discovering mostly they can.
Right.
How can they apply the principles of your work to try to now take the next step culturally?
I mean, I agree. I maybe it was in a similar article, but the CEO of Twitter said recently, up until now, we have been sort of living off of our relationship capital from when we were face to face.
Yeah.
But June, and already I've talked to companies where more than half the company are people that started in the last 8 months. You
Right.
and I are doing this because we met in person.
Yes.
uh, and we were able to build on that.
Yeah.
And so I believe this isn't really answering your question, which I will do, is that it's making the case. I know all these companies are saying, oh, you never have to go back. I'm on the side of the page with the Twitter, or with the CEO of Google, who was saying, we're going to have to figure out a way to go back. It's going to be different. And we don't need to go back all the time, but we need to be, we're human beings and we need to be able to connect. So that being said, right now we're not. So right now we are doing this. And so how do we build stronger relationships? And one of the tools is through rituals. When I think about where to start, first I would look at that employee experience, that employee life cycle, and try to say, well, what did we do before? How did we celebrate milestones and have celebrations? And are there things that we can do remotely? And if not, let's think about how we can create something new. So one example that I'll share, and again, none of this is ideal, but it's a place to start, and it's so important to do it in a way that's really aligned with your values and the essence and the soul of your company. So I'll give two examples. One is an example around eating, because, well, Chipotle, they're still doing that eating in person because they're in the stores, but most
Right.
companies, they're not, right? So we're not all having lunch together. So um, so what Udemy did, the online learning company, is they have a very lunch heavy culture. They have a big cafeteria, and who knows when we'll be back to eating in a cafeteria ever again. They were very intentional with the way that they ate lunch together. So many companies out there, Silicon Valley, they all have cafeterias. You can go in there anytime during the day. What struck me about Udemy was that the cafeteria was only open from 12 to 1. So everybody would line up, and we know what would happen. We're bumping into each other, we're connecting with each other, we're shooting the breeze personally. Oh, Alyssa, I meant to ask you this thing about the meeting, and then we don't need to send 7 emails in the afternoon. So that's an important ritual that is in the book right now. Clearly at Udemy and in all companies, that's not happening. However, what they did, knowing about the value of bringing people together around food and how important that is to the culture, and how people were, craving it, excuse the pun, um, they they also have a thing called lunch roulette, where pre-COVID you could raise your hand and say, every other Thursday, I want to go have lunch with 5 people that aren't on my team to get to know other people, and the company would pay for it. And what they started doing during COVID, and they've have, I mean, huge engagement around this. Tons of people are opting in, that we would all 5 of us, decide to have lunch roulette. The company would pay, we would order in from a place locally and support our local diner down the street. And we would all have lunch together. And what was different from what the employees have told me about that Zoom lunch versus others, it's about the intention. We're not just multitasking and having lunch and having a meeting. That this is lunch roulette. The idea and the intention behind it is for us to connect with people that we don't always work with. So it felt different than just having another Zoom. It brought people back to a state of sort of safety and belonging, like everything's going to be okay. We did this before. So I'd say that's one example. One other example that I'll
Mhm.
share, similar but different, is an agency in Houston called Black Sheep. And they would have a toast at the end of every week on Friday, champagne toast, to celebrate wins, small wins, big wins. And I have a whole chapter on celebrating milestones, because it is a very ritualized thing that we do at work. But this is a fast growing company where they felt like if they didn't take a minute to connect and celebrate, like, they're just moving at such a fast pace. So the CEO wrote me in April and said, we all went remote, we all are home, and the first Friday they were able to, get everybody settled and do this ritual, there was such a sense of connection, and it was almost like it brought the stress level down. Again, like, we're going to be okay and we feel connected and we'd rather be in person, but we are going to continue to be who we are through these rituals.
Those are both uh, great examples, and both of them are kind of connected to previous rituals, which is I can see can give you the sense of continuity and, like you said, belonging. Do you have any beginning level rituals you recommend to companies that feel like, either they're young or they're still relatively small. They just don't feel like they've established that kind of thing. Do you have any beginning level rituals you recommend as like low hanging fruit, I guess?
I don't know if it's the sort of beginning or more advanced.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Um, many times when you look back, the rituals, they can be top down, they could be bottom up. Sometimes people have started a ritual and the person that started it is gone, but the ritual has lived on, for decades afterwards. I mean, it's kind of crazy what sticks.
It
But
is.
to me, a great starting point is to say, well, let's look at how we're spending our day, our week. So there's, I think, a really powerful place for rituals, and we were talking about it earlier with our coffee rituals, are beginnings. How do you begin your day? How do you begin a project? How do you end your day? How do you end a project? Like, those are some interesting places to start and to think about, what could we try out? Um, as a ritual. And one thing I would say, and also meetings. I think we're all having a lot of meetings. A question that I often get is, we all check in with each other, and we've been doing this for 8 months. Do I need to keep checking in 8 months later? My short answer is yes, but it doesn't have to take 20 minutes of a 45-minute meeting. So
Right.
think about, like, that ritual has really evolved. And I say to people, look, everybody go around the room and give one adjective to say how they're feeling in this moment. And so play around with it. Don't get stuck on doing it one way. And if it doesn't stick, you need to move on, because a ritual is not a ritual if it's this top down, this is what we must do.
Yeah. I could see I've had that exact experience with it's kind of hard to know how much time do you devote to the catching up when you're not seeing each other every day. I could also see if you had regular meetings with the same team that every week it's someone else's turn to lead it or kick off with telling you, let's say on Mondays, you lead off with kick off, one person each week talks about what they did over the weekend or whatever. And it's kind of hard right now because weekends kind of blend into weekdays, but actually maybe that's something that's good for a company to instill in its employees, that they should still be trying to have this sense of rest and this sense of break anyway. We have a question in the Q&A from our colleague Matt, who used to work at Intuit, and they had, as many Silicon Valley companies had, Friday beer bashes. And then at some point, because it sounded alcohol centric, as they got bigger, they shied away from it and they tried to do a coffee hour, which didn't really resonate with some of their employees. And so I beginnings are one thing, but what about the end of the week? What about Fridays? Have you observed, did you see any companies that had a great weekend, way to end the week kind of
I,
ritual?
I will say to this question, I agree with not making all these rituals around alcohol, and not making them all after work. Because one of the things that was happening in the beginning with all these happy hours, depending on what was going on in people's lives, the last thing they wanted to do was to keep doing these things, after work. They were taking, you're taking care of your parents right now. My kids are, who knows where they are right now. Hopefully they're all okay. But so we need to think about, if you really value connecting with colleagues from a leadership perspective, do it during the day. And because
Yes.
it's part of work, and that you need to lead by example, because if the leaders aren't doing it, no one else will feel like they can do it. So
Mm,
one of a great example, I would say a couple of things. One trend that I've been seeing is is a focus on wellness because people also aren't taking vacation. They're not taking vacation for a couple of reasons. One, they're scared they're going to lose their job. Two, they're like, where am I going? Like, I
Right,
don't use my vacation days. So
right.
many progressive companies are saying, you got to take time off. It won't count against your days, even though many companies have unlimited days anyway, but we're all going to implode if we don't take time off, but people aren't listening. So some companies are ritualizing wellness to be able to say, Wellness Wednesday, this Wednesday, everybody is taking off. And when you come back, you have to tell your team what you did. That's your homework, that you have to do something where you focus on yourself and you are not working. And so I love that because it's walking the walk and saying, look, wellness is important. We know it's good for you, it's good for our business, and we're all doing it. To answer your question about the end of the week, there's a company called Notch. It's a marketing organization, and every Friday they did it pre-COVID, and they've been doing it for the last 8 months remotely. They have show and tell at the end, and what they found was that Friday afternoon is a time when people aren't really working. You're winding down, so why not lean into that
Yeah.
versus acting like it's a productive time of day. And so they would all get together, and that's when they would introduce new employees. Somebody would share pictures of a vacation, and it is, and it was and is still a ritual, and everybody knows like that's the way we ease into our weekend.
Yeah, and to Matt's what clarified his question, he was also kind of asking about, the milestones of achievements during the week and celebrating that. The one ritual that keeps coming to my mind as we're having this conversation that was not this when I was at BlogHer, and it wasn't company wide, it was my team, and I used to watch the show Bones, which
Yeah.
was just fun, and they had a saying in Bones, when someone in the forensics lab, when someone figured out something really smart, they would say king of the lab, and then everyone would try and claim being king of the lab. And so I started saying to people when they brought me something really just smart and awesome, queen of the lab, because I think my entire team was, I think they were all women for the whole time. I'm not sure. Oh, I had a couple men, but most of the time it was all women. And so, I would say queen of the lab. And then it started to be that we could call it wasn't just me saying queen of the lab to my team members. My team members could deem somebody else queen of the lab. And then one of my team members started making little gift trophies with queen of the lab on it and sending them to people. And it became just this thing. And it was very, it was just our team, our part of this wasn't everybody at Blogger, it was just our team. It was really arcane where it came from. Not even like all of them watched Bones. That was just how I started it.
Well, and
And
that's a ritual. It's a perfect example of it evolved.
and we were not a lab. But it was just this funny little thing. And that's this whole time we've been talking about, like, that is like one ritual I can really think of where it just took on life of its own. Everybody got more invested in it. I didn't own it as the manager. Somebody could call somebody else on the team queen of the lab. And then we just took it further and further. And we used it exactly for that thing that you're talking about, Matt, which is someone had an accomplishment, someone made a big sale, or they figured out a problem, or they, cracked the code on something, and we could sort of give them that nod. Um, we talked a little bit already about politics, and I see we have some questions. So I'm going to try and get to this last question I had, and then get to other people's questions. So you already mentioned a little bit about politics and social justice. I don't know if you saw the CEO of Coinbase recently took this stand, and it was supported publicly by at least one of his investors, that he didn't want his companies to talk about or ask the company to talk about values at all outside the basic mission of the company, and that was the only mission that they wanted to focus on and serve. And of course, he found some way to kind of twist it so Coinbase's cryptocurrency mission was somehow good for the world. Okay. And I wonder, he's a white male founder. I wonder if he has any employees who, in this current time, I wonder if he has any Black employees, for example, and how they feel about such an explicit rejection of talking about other kinds of values. Meanwhile, we have you and I both know Susan McPherson, who's working on getting companies on the record supporting reproductive rights as a way to support their employees. There are companies making Black Lives Matter stands, and some of those are turning out successfully, and some of those are kind of messy. You already mentioned this a little bit with the General Mills CEO, but I think we are also in a time when consumers want to know. And the Edelman Trust Survey indicates clearly that consumers want to know where companies stand, and maybe not always just, Patagonia and the environment, completely 100% understandable and aligned. If General Mills also worked on, like, say, food scarcity or children's hunger or whatever, totally, these things would be 100% aligned with what their company does. But I think consumers are looking for more. And how do you recommend that leaders tackle that as part of us now expecting companies and the people behind them to bring their humanity to business?
So first, I think dictating to an employee base that you can't talk about values is going to backfire.
Yeah.
It just That's just my personal opinion, that to your point, people want to work for companies where they have shared values. They want to buy things from companies where they have shared values. And so to know that or do that, you have to talk about the values of the organization and not just the mission, because the values and the mission are different things, right? The values are,
Right.
what is core to us? How are we going to behave? Not what we're going to do, but how are we going to do it? So number one for me, that is going to backfire. In terms of dealing with a lot of the unrest and what's going on right now, companies from an internal perspective are taking it on. I mean, they're looking, and some better than others, and people are saying we don't know everything, but we do need to start figuring out ways to have these kinds of conversations in ways where people feel safe. So I do think that more than ever before, from what I've seen, is that companies are not standing and speaking to the world from a, I'm the CEO of PayPal and this is our stand on this, but internally with employee groups and unconscious bias training, and really rolling up their sleeves and getting into it, through their employee resource groups, or even as a whole, they're getting into it more than ever before. And I'll link this to one last thing about rituals, is that when we talk about creating new rituals during this time, one of the things that I have seen to be so impactful, and it's related to this issue about the political unrest and COVID and being nervous about your job, is that leaders have been communicating on a much more regular basis, the cadence, and using different mediums. And many CEOs have been sending out weekly, if not daily, emails to the whole company, addressing social unrest, addressing being as transparent as they can with the business. And it's become a ritual. And the one quick example that I love, and it's not in the book, so I really want to share it because it happened after the book was done, is from Bill Konigsberg, the CEO of Horizon Media. And a couple of weeks into COVID, he sent out a email to all of the employees, and he ended it, with, talk about what's going on in the company and the world. And he ended it with a hope, something very hopeful. And this became what was called the Bill Daily. And he's been doing it every single day. And he said, and I said, well, do you think it's a ritual? He said, if 5:30 p.m. comes and there's no email, people would start to go crazy. He's gotten more feedback from people because in these emails, he's brought his human. He's been vulnerable. Yes, he's the CEO, but this has been hard for him too. And so it's a ritual that's enabled him to connect with employees and clients on a deeper level. And one of the funny parts is that he told me, and I interviewed him for my podcast, the next season, which is going to air in a couple weeks. He said he's gotten at least 40 emails from his employees' parents, because the employees are forwarding it saying,
Oh,
you got to read this. And so it's a way to bring these challenging external issues internal, share your point of view, share how it's impacting you as a leader, and really setting the tone in terms of values. It's almost the antithesis of your example.
Yeah, it reminds me of Robert Glazer, who I'm going to be interviewing in, I think, December. He's CEO of a company, Acceleration Partners, and he started sending these Friday forward, he called them, emails. Um, and he started sending them just in his company, but he got so much amazing feedback and about how much they forwarded it. And every week it was just his reflection on something. So he started then doing it as a newsletter, to which I subscribed. And I will confess that for, I don't know how long I was subscribed, where I wasn't really paying attention that much because I get a lot of email, And then one week I read it and it was really touched me so much. And I wrote him back to tell him. And then I started reading them every week and they are fantastic. And now that's turned into a book that is coming out of his essays. But they say I just never, it gave me such a window into him as a human, as you say. And it just was such a positive reflection on the company because he's the guy running it. And if he's this person with these values, that
Mhm.
company must be great. Right. So I just feel like people want to know. And I think, you make a great point about starting your own house. I was watching a keynote that someone who used to write for Blog Her, Feminista Jones, was doing a keynote for an event. And she said a lot of these companies, the reason it gets messy when a lot of these companies put out messages about Black Lives Matter or something, is that they haven't straightened up their own house with how they treat their own Black employees. And she's saying you care a lot about Breonna Taylor. And she said something which it really stuck with me because it was quite provocative. She said, it's easy to care about Breonna Taylor. She's dead and you can't do anything about it. You don't have to do anything for her.
Yeah.
But how about you look at the employees you have in your own company? You could do things for those people. You could make sure that they were being treated equitably in the things you control. And so it's a great point about starting with your own house, starting internally, before you necessarily decide that you've got a lot to say. And that's where I think things have backfired for some companies as well, when they make these statements and then someone's like, oh, hi, I used to work there, and
Right.
and this is how problematic it
Something
was.
like that. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Um, just one more question I want to bring over from the Q&A, which is, and I know this because my significant other works at a big tech company that does a lot of shipping and has a lot of tangible in real life. Yes, Anita, Feminista does say it so well. Um, they would get t-shirts for releases. Sometimes they would get new product if it was released. They would have launch parties. They would have all sorts of things, or even down to, they would just have tangible items that were part of and then you had these things. And so 5 years later, you're wearing the shirt from this launch or this, software release or whatever. And I don't think they have not, this very, very, very large, well-resourced tech company has not mailed a single thing to employees, as far as I can tell. What do you think of the idea of trying to provide people ongoing mementos and doing rituals I mean, I understand it would take more logistical complication, but some of these companies are very capable of it. It just seems like
I see it happen.
that is not, you do see it happening?
I see it happening more and more, especially to your point. We're going into month 8 with no end in sight. And
Right.
so with companies saying we're not going to go back for a year, some people are trickling in. So I'm seeing companies send, craft cocktail kits so everybody can make a drink together, do a cooking thing together. I'm actually working with an organization for when my book launches, where we'll do a book club, and then this company, all the company has to do is send a list of names and addresses for people who are going to get the book, and all of a sudden they get something in the mail.
Yeah.
Companies are onboarding, they're sending boxes of swag to make people feel part of the culture even before day one. So to me, if not if you're about to go under, but if you're a company that can afford it, people, who doesn't love to get something in the mail,
Yeah.
especially.
Well, and I have a good friend who's in the promotional items business. I mean, that's her business. And she used to have big business with big Silicon Valley companies. And one of the things many companies do are, as you say, this amount of swag you get when you join that's sitting at your desk or whatever. And her business has been very hard hit by the pandemic, and it's now starting to pick up a little because I think people, so that's what I was saying earlier. I feel like people logistically had to get settled with how do we even communicate and do our work, but now they're realizing, okay, we need to start doing some stuff to retain and improve our culture. um my last question for you is, I feel like both of your first two books were really, like I said, it's one of my favorite words. I don't get to trot it out very often, prescient, and sort of looking ahead. They were just right for the time and really important for the time. So, what's your next line of inquiry? I'm curious, since I think you're obviously a trend spotter. So, like, what are you thinking about now? I know Rituals Roadmap. What is the date of its release?
I was gonna say, I don't think I'm not quite there yet because the book hasn't even come out yet. So part of it is getting the reaction to the book. I mean, what I'm thinking about a lot now, just personally, is, if we had this conversation a year ago,
Yeah,
and you would say, what are you seeing around bringing your human to work? I would have said to you, I am going into offices, big and small, all over the country, and people are texting each other in the next cubicle, calling into meetings from down the hall, not valuing being together in the same
yeah,
building. So what I'm thinking a lot about is, when we go back, what is that going to look like? And what I'm seeing in my head is some type of, I don't even want to use hybrid, because all I think about is my kids staying home from school 3 days a week, but some type of situation where you when you go into the office, you're going in with the intention and attention to connect with people. So if I have to do a spreadsheet and I'm writing, I don't need to go into the office
right.
to be alone together. I should go into the office to see you and connect with you and innovate. So I'm not saying that, I mean, I'm sure plenty of people are thinking about this, but I'm trying to, that's been on my mind a lot.
I've heard it expressed as, we used to have the occasional offsite where we would leave the office where you were every day to connect at a deeper level. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't mind doing the occasional onsite where we
Correct.
go to the office to connect. So there's
Right.
there's one last question from the audience, and it's pretty poignant. And I'm wondering if you have some thoughts. They say, where do organizations start when they don't have a culture, or there's already harm? How can you start fresh and establish trust so people participate? Can you do it? um so
Well,
how do you fix a culture?
Well, what's interesting is when if someone says, we don't have a culture, by not having anything by default, there is something that
Yes.
exists. So what my perspective is, that, so in absent of having a proactive culture, there's something that's there. I would bring people together and have, especially if a new company, small company, do top down, bottom up, talk to people and get a sense of shared values. And you have to start there. And there's companies that do this, or do it yourself. But to really get input from as many people as you can, different stakeholders, even clients. Many companies make the mistake of having too many values, 10, 12, 14 values. We saw what happened to Uber under the founder and CEO, and under Travis, where their values, they had 14, and their values really sent them in a direction where they weren't treating people well. 3 to 6, 6 really is my max. You want people to be able to remember them, and you want them to drive behavior. And it's hard to get into all of these other ways to create a more human workplace without them, because once you have the values, who you hire and how you have meetings and how you celebrate milestones and performance, all of that can be aligned
Yeah.
to values. So whether you realize it or not, you have something. The question then is, do you like what you have, or you want to start with a clean slate and build in those values?
But I absolutely think my opinion when if you're talking about so it's not that you have no culture, it's that you have a sort of anti-culture, a bad culture. And can it start fresh and can I think you would have to bring people together. I think to your point, you'd have to be able to articulate what your values are, but you'd also have to be really open to listening.
And right, and acknowledge that
And that's
that
very,
culture has crept into what's going on here because we didn't start with. I mean, it's hard for startups. Some really do try to start with those values. Others, you start a company, you're moving so fast, you just want to get the products out the door, and then you need to go back. So it's doable, but you have to really be willing to be open and vulnerable and talk about what's not working.
yeah. And listen to people at every level about that. Because I find, you can't, culture cannot just be driven top down. Yes, a fish rots from the head, as they say. Bad culture often comes top down, but a good culture can't be just mandated top down. It has to bubble. You have to allow it to bubble up as well. So please, thank you so much. I just think this is really timely and relevant for where we are right this minute, and where a lot of people in companies are probably going, okay, now what's next to try and keep going? Because as you say, very little end in sight for a lot of us. So where can people find you? When is your book out? Tell me about your podcast, your website, your socials. Like, where should people go learn from more from you?
Great. So you can find me at my website, which is just my name, ericakeswin.com. The podcast, the second season is launching next week. And the first season was the quarantine edition. It's kind of interesting to go back and listen to it because it really is this historical moment in time where nobody was leaving their house. I taped all of them
Yeah.
April, May, and beginning of June. It's kind of crazy. Second
What's it
season,
called?
it's the quarantine edition. The podcast is called Left to Our Own Devices because left to our own devices, we're not connecting. So it's about being intentional about our relationships. The second season, no surprise, is about rituals. And the book comes out on January 26th. And I'm really excited. It's available for pre-order. And one of the things that I am offering to people is that they do pre-order, which I know you did. So thank you very much for that. And send me an email, at erica@keswin.com. I have a teaser, a chapter in the book that I'm sending to people, which people are really enjoying. So, I'm open, get to me on Twitter or on Instagram, and I'm excited to hear from people.
Yeah, for all of you who really valued what Erica brought for us today, pre-orders do count towards the first week's sales.
Yeah.
So and for book authors, it's all about the early, like the first week or two, and it's all about a concentration. So pre-orders are super helpful to authors. And I can say as a fellow podcaster that ratings and reviews are super important to podcasters, super important to authors too. There's a whole like behind the curtain, no one knows exactly how it works, but there's all these milestones. If you get 50 reviews, if you get this many reviews. So if you really like Erica's work as I do, these are some of the ways that you can support her. And we just want to thank you so much for joining us. This was another weekly fireside chat from Remotely. We are a professional development network and think tank looking at making remote work for everyone. And so if you want to learn more, go to remotely.global/join if you're interested in joining us as a member. And remotely.global/events to see our whole lineup of events coming. And I know that on Tuesday, we have another colleague, Matt Weeks, talking about the financial considerations of working from home, tax deductions, what is and what isn't, and all the different things you can ask your company to cover, expenses, and sure much more, because he's the expert on it, not me. So I'm sure I'm not articulating them all, but please join us then. And we will see you next time. Thank you again, Erica.
For having me.